is my honor to introduce today's speaker, Dr. Robert Brooks. He's one of the country's most sensitive, responsive, and enlightening child psychologists. He's also a prolific author and speaker. He's known nationally and internationally to audiences of parents, educators, mental health professionals, and business people for his expertise on topics ranging from motivation, resilience, family relationships, to qualities of effective leaders and executives, and to balancing our personal and professional lives. He's the author or co-author of 15 books, one of which, Raising Resilient Children, is available today, and I hope that as many of you as possible will be able to stop by at the end of the program. He has produced several videos and documentaries and received many awards, way too numerous to mention here. He's on the faculty at Harvard Medical School, and he also maintains a part-time practice in which he sees children, youth, parents, and families. And as Michael alluded to, Michael and I were speaking about this morning, we're bombarded daily with messages of what we hear about children and families in the negative. It's pathologized. We're told what's wrong, what we're doing wrong as parents, what's wrong with our families. And it's kind of refreshing to hear from somebody who chooses to focus instead on the positives, to emphasize our children's strengths. And I guess what I want to say about that is that it's consistent with our message here at the Boston Children's Museum. It's a fundamental premise upon which the museum is built, and so it's important that we note that today. And finally, though it has been a while, Dr. Brooks has been a valued volunteer and consultant with the museum, specifically on some of the museum's projects over the years aimed at helping children to understand different abilities and disabilities, including children with special needs in our programs. Again, hearkening to what is positive, what our children's strengths are, and focusing on that. And so without further ado, we are very fortunate to have him back with us today. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Dr. Robert Brooks.
I can't tell you what a pleasure it is to be back here, having served on the committees. It goes back about 35 years, and now having two grandchildren in the area, it's given me a chance to come back. Not that you need grandchildren, but it's nice to come with the kids and see how much they enjoy things here. So thank you very much. I should also mention, I know there's a book here, but if you're interested in anything I say today, on my website, or where my handouts really are, I might write a monthly article for parents, teachers, mental health professionals. Everything I'm going to be discussing today, you'll find briefer articles on my website. It's totally free to subscribe. I write a monthly column, and you'll see all of these topics. What I always have to tell people, though, of course, is what my website address is. So it's Dr. Robert Brooks, I selected my own name, by the way, .com. Now, the reason I mention this, when I went to get a website address many years ago, when websites were coming in, I typed in robertbrooks.com. And if any of you ever tried to get an email address and it comes back, it says it's already taken, well, I was so naive. I get this message, it's taken. I remember I said, who took it? I mean, this is my name. And I said, I better check who the other Robert Brooks is. Well, I should have guessed. I'm a very big sports fan. There used to be a wonderful player on the National Football League on the Green Bay Packers whose name is Robert Brooks. He beat me to it. Now, the other Robert Brooks is a very handsome, muscular, African-American man who's also a gospel singer. If you do not type in Dr. but robertbrooks.com, you will go to his homepage where he appears without a shirt on, muscles bulging, singing gospel, which I thought was kind of neat till someone wrote to me and said, you look so much better on your website than in real life. So now you'll have a choice. Who are you going to first? Actually, go to both of them on that. So given the relatively, I've been interested in resilience for over 40 years, and I have 45 minutes to share some ideas, and then I want to take your questions. So I'm going to get right into this and really highlight a few key points. I started becoming very interested in resilience. People have often asked after I got my doctorate at Clark University, and then I did additional training at the University of Colorado Medical School. And then I came back to Boston, and I worked in Roxbury and North Dorchester for several years, doing a lot of work in the Boston schools. And I could see the roots of my interest then, because I started asking certain questions like, how can someone grow up under racism and poverty, and yet you meet them as adults, and you're really amazed by how hopeful and optimistic they are. And then much of my career, some of you know, was spent at McLean Hospital. And one of my toughest jobs there, which I had to write a book about resilience in adults about, was I really ran a locked door unit for children and adolescents. And even as we did follow-up studies, I became very fascinated. Why is it that some kids could experience such adversity, and yet as adults, by all measures, be doing relatively well in life? They were more hopeful, they were more optimistic, they were decent jobs, good relationships. And yet there were some kids who seemed to be doing very well as adolescents who then were not as resilient. So let me summarize where this all led. I became very interested in this topic then in 1970, 71, 72, 73, and then more and more research started to come out, and any of you know in the field of psychology, one of the biggest areas now is called positive psychology, where people are really looking much more, and Michael's comment on this, really in terms of opportunity and strengths rather than just on pathology. So research starts coming out. I'm fascinated by this. I'm fascinated as a psychologist. I'm fascinated as a therapist. I'm fascinated as an educator, and probably really fascinated raising, with my wife, 2 sons. And so what happened was research came out, and some of the early research, they actually asked people who had bounced back. These were adults who had had difficult childhoods, and they asked them a fascinating question. And I love these direct questions. They said, we could have never predicted, based on how you were growing up, that you would be at the place you are today. That you're really optimistic about things. That you're really very proactive, not reactive. That you don't have a victim mentality. And they asked this, what do you think was the most important thing in your childhood or adolescence to help you to be resilient? And by the way, when I talk about resilience, because we could spend an hour just on the different meanings, just to say, really means basically to bounce back. It doesn't mean you're not going to face problems. You will face problems. It means when you face problems, you have the capacity to cope with these problems. So they asked these individuals to overcome great adversity, and they said, what do you think was the most important thing in your childhood or adolescence to help you be resilient today? In every study that was ever done, it didn't matter what country it was done in, it didn't matter what state it was done in, the first answer was almost always the same. When I first read it, and it almost sounded very simple, but when I was asking the question, I got the same answer. But I'll say this, in a very spiritual way, I think it's why we're all here in this world. The first answer always was, there was at least one person along the way who truly believed in me and stood by me, even one person. And in 1988, one of my heroes in the field of psychology, a wonderful psychologist, some of you may know his name, he died a few years ago from Washington, D.C. His name was Julius Siegel. He wrote a 3-page article in the Brown University Child Development Newsletter that if I could mandate would be up in every home, school, clinic. But if you go to my website, his main quote appears in several articles. This is what he said. He said, in research conducted around the world about children of misfortune, that's any kid who has problems, the ones who make it have during their childhood or adolescence the presence of what he called a charismatic adult. Now, some people were actually taken aback by that. I was at a meeting with Dr. Siegel in Washington, and he mentioned charismatic adult, and someone in the audience who had not read any of his work didn't even give him a chance to define it, just shouted out, is that like a cult figure? But wait till you hear his definition. His definition is poetic. He says, a charismatic adult is an adult from whom a child or adolescent gathers strength. I love that image. A child or adolescent gathers strength. By the way, I couldn't stop thinking about it. When parents came to see me in my practice, I started asking, when you put your children to bed at night, you ask this question, is my son or daughter stronger because of things I've said or done today, or are they less strong? I do a lot of work in schools. I started saying to teachers at the end of every school day, do you ask this question, is every student, not just the A students, is every student stronger because of things I've said or done, or less strong? I do a lot of marital therapy. This gets a little dicey. Is your husband stronger because of... Oh, well, anyway, I've broken up more marriages because people hadn't even thought of that. So, but it's really interesting. And by the way, and I shouldn't say just by the way, incidentally, I was once asked, do we as adults need charismatic adults in our life? And unless you've decided to be a hermit, you do. And if you go to my website, you'll see the questions I ask adults, like, who do you gather strength from? Who gathers strength from you? So these are all very important questions. So I just became fascinated by that. So all of my talks and writings, I started talking about charismatic adults. And then I love this. What happened next? All of a sudden, people would say, someone would send me emails, sign me up, I want to be a charismatic adult. What do I say or do, kind of thing. And you have to be careful. I was speaking at one clinic in Boston once, and they worked with very challenging youth, and I said, maybe you should all get a t-shirt. I was kidding a little, the clinic's name, and then it would say, I am a charismatic adult. And people laughed. I totally forgot I suggested it. A year and a half later, I was invited back to give a follow-up talk. I gave the follow-up talk. The executive director said, Bob, before you leave, we have a present for you. You could all guess, this magnificent t-shirt. I am a charismatic adult. By the way, I was so thrilled. I wore it that night at home. My wife said, take it off. You're never a prophet in your own land. Have you ever seen that? But it's an intriguing question. Imagine if I were to say right now, of course, Michael and Andrew would be really annoyed. Okay, that's my talk. Thank you very much. Every one of you in the room would have the right to ask this question. Well, what do you do? What does a charismatic adult do? See, they look like all of us, but what do they do? This is the passion of my career in the last 40 years. And I use that word. What do you do? And again, I'm going to give you a summary, and then I'll wait for your questions. But if any of you are interested, please do more reading, because one of the most important roles we can serve in life at any point is to be a charismatic adult for other people, that they gather strength from us. One of the things, and by the way, at the end of this talk, the best compliment you could pay me is it really validates what we're already doing. I just hope I give some language to what you're doing. One of the things, and this may seem very, very obvious, and I really talked a little to Michael's comment about the interview this morning, was this. Charismatic adults never minimize or deny a child's problems. Because if your kid has problems and you're denying or minimizing it, they're not going to get help. But you know what charismatic adults do? Charismatic adults always keep a focus on the child's strengths, their beauty, and 33 years ago, I can't believe how many years now, I started to use a metaphor in all my writings. And I started to say every child, and by the way, every adult has what I call islands of competence or areas of strength. And it changed my clinical work. When parents would come in to see me, why would they come in to see me? Because their kid has problems. I'd spend the first few hours listening about the problems. And then I realized something. You will never touch a child's heart and soul and mind unless when they look in your eyes, they also appreciate that you see their beauty and strengths. Every one of us wants people to see our beauty and strengths. So you know what? After 5-10 minutes of my clinical practice, I then started to say to parents, now that I've heard about some of the problems, can you please tell me what you see as your child's strengths? And then I found something else out. Many parents who came in were feeling very defeated themselves. So I would say, what do you see as your strengths? And some parents would actually say, I don't think I have any. And I would say, we all have strengths. We've just got to figure out what they are. And it could be the smallest things. But every child has strengths, and we have to build on it. I work with a lot of kids with learning and attentional problems, but I know some of them who are so skilled in other ways. They draw very well. Their paintings should be up there. We all have different islands of competence. I am not handy. If something breaks in my house, some of you may know this. You may have relatives like this. My wife knows the moment something breaks in my house, you know what I say? Call someone. Just call someone. I remember one time my car wouldn't work. I picked up the hood. My wife is very loving but direct. She said, why? Because she knew I didn't have the foggiest idea what was under there. But you see, we have to look at that. You start asking, how do you build up strengths? There was this boy, very low self-esteem. Every day when he came into the school, the first thing he did was hit another kid. He was constantly sent to the principal's office. And the other thing, the principal called me, said, he's driving me crazy. Either he goes into the school, hits someone, or now he's hiding behind the bushes of the school. And I love this principal. I said, so what do you do when he hides behind the bushes? Principal, I'm smiling instead. He says, why do you think I'm calling you? I don't have the foggiest idea. I drag him in every day. It doesn't look good for the other kids. So I said, okay. I meet this kid, and I still remember his opening comment. I know why I'm seeing you. I said, oh yeah, why? I hide behind the bushes of the school. What the hell do you think you're going to do about it? And I felt like saying, look, I'm trying to develop a strength-based model. This is not helping here. So I didn't know what to say. So all I could think of saying, you ever get stuck? All I could think of saying is, why do you hide behind the bushes? Dumb question. His answer was great. I like the bushes better than I like school. Well, at this point, you can get into a debate about the relative merits of bushes versus schools, or you could find his island of competence. If there were gods of therapy, they were in my office that day, I totally switched. I said, what do you enjoy doing? What do you like to do? His whole demeanor, I love to take care of my pet dog. I really do a good job. So I did what any of you would do. I said, I have no idea how to take care of pet dogs. What do you suggest? It was like the spigot was turned on. For 45 minutes, non-stop basically, he tells me how you take care of a pet dog. It was almost comical. Finally, the session was over. I said, it's time to stop. He looks at me and says, good session, Doc. So I called the principal. I told the kid I was going to call the principal. Real character. The principal, I said, does your school have a pet monitor? The principal says, well, what is it? I said, if you have to ask what it is, you don't have it and you need it. I'm so bright. Anyway. The next day, the principal calls me, says, oh, Bob, I love this metaphor, islands of competence. I love the strength-based model. I just had one of the most fun meetings I've ever had with a kid. I said, yeah, what happened? He said, the toughest thing was I was ready to crack up laughing the whole meeting, but I had to look serious. He calls the kid and he said, Dr. Brooks told me you like to take care of pets. Guess what? This was purely coincidental. Just yesterday, a class got a new pet rabbit. And the principal says to the kid, a principal should know how many pets there are in a school. So he said, I walked around this morning. There are over a dozen pets. I know each class takes care of their own pet, but I need at least one person to make sure they're all well taken care of. I would like you to become the first pet monitor of the school. And by the way, I didn't know the principal was going to do this. That's why I'm also telling you this story. He made a union card for the kid, laminated. It said Pet Monitor Union. By the way, this is 33 years ago. I still don't know if the kid was kidding. He comes in the very next session, throws his union card on the desk, just like this. He says, Brooks, be careful. I'm union now. But what was a pet monitor? It was his job to come in 10 minutes early every day to take care of the pet rabbit. Soon he's taking care of other pets. Soon this kid who never wanted to write, see, that's why he would hit other kids. You know what he told me eventually in therapy? I'd rather hit other kids and be sent to the principal's office than have to be in the classroom where I felt like a dummy. You know how desperate some kids are? You know what his wonderful, charismatic teacher said? I checked every book in the school library. There's not one good book on taking care of pets. You should write a little book. And you know what he said? I really don't like to write. And you know what she said? Oh, a lot of kids don't like to write, but I'll help you. So with her help, he wrote a little book, How to Take Care of Pets. That book was bound and put in the school library. And by the end of the year, he lectured in every classroom in that building on how to take care of pets. And by the way, he never hid behind the bushes again. Based on something a mother once said, I recently gave a talk. I don't know if you'll agree with me. Too often we punish suffering children. See, you know what a whole strength-based model is if you believe in resilience? The question you have to ask is, how do I make every child feel dignified in my presence? That teacher and that school principal totally redirected that kid's life into a much more successful life. You know why? Because instead of punishing a suffering child, they asked, what will give this kid a sense of dignity? So one thing I always look at is strengths. Another thing is this. Years ago, when I was writing one of my first books, it was about school climate, I asked 1,500 adults this question. Because I wanted to know, what does each one of us remember that was most meaningful about our school experience? This was the question. Of all the memories you have of school, what is your favorite memory? But it was a very specific question. Something an adult in the school said or did that boosted your dignity and your motivation. See, I wanted to know, what do people remember? Some of the people who filled it out were 70 years old. Some were 22. What did you most remember? The number one positive memory of school I never had expected. But you know what? Afterwards, I said, well, why didn't you expect it? You know what the number one positive memory of school was? It was to totally become a major part of my resilience approach. When you were asked to help out. Do you know what I got? I remember when a teacher asked me to pass out the milk and straws. I remember when a teacher asked me to tutor a younger child. I remember I was stunned at first. I said, that's the most positive memory of school? By the way, In my book, Raising Resilient Children, you know what I wrote? I hope you agree. I think there's an inborn need in children to want to help. You want to try? Go to any nursery school. Don't tell them I sent you in case you're disruptive. But stand in the lobby. Just stand in the lobby and just say, I need your help. You'll become like a light bulb. 80 moths will come flocking towards you. But you know, it's not just kids. When I was writing my book about resilience in adults through our elderly years, wonderful research to show elderly people who are actively involved in helping others, even if you control for other things, like they smoke too much, whatever, lead longer lives. Not only that, there's research to show, just to give you another example, you know one way they cut down on prisoner violence? What did they bring in some prisons? Pets. If you go to my website, there's an article called Puppies Behind Bars. They brought in, it's an actual program, they brought in pets and they trained the inmates to train the pets. One thing I guess what they trained them was seeing eye dogs. I should have guessed the other was jail, drug-sniffing dogs. These inmates, one of them, I went to their blog, said, I thought I could never care again. I will never stop caring now. Now, what is the implication of this? Let's go back to kids. One of the things when I see parents, I always will ask this. If I asked your children the following question, how would they answer the following questions? And by the way, I'm going to use grown-up language with you. If it was a 5-year-old, I'd never speak this way. What charitable activities have you seen your parents involved in the last 3 to 6 months? Because kids notice if we are helpful or kind. And I'm not talking about anything earth-shaking. I've had kids say, my parent coaches a team in town. They volunteer here. But they have to see us. Because, you know what? Think of it this way. When you feel, because you're on this earth is a better place, then it gives you a purpose. See, a lot of people have been writing about purpose. It makes you feel that there's a purpose. And that really gives you meaning, and it helps with resilience. So what charitable activities have you seen your parents involved in? And then one of my favorite questions I ask parents, how would your kids answer this? What charitable activities have you been involved with your parents as a family? I think too many kids grow up in today's world. I don't want to stereotype it. They know just a few words. Gimme, 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 gimme. And I feel starting at a very early age through our places of worship, through walks for hunger, walks for AIDS, whatever it is, we have to involve kids. But we also have to use a certain language. You know what I found? Because I used to say to my sons all the time, it's time to do your chores. Guess what? Do you think they said, thank you so much for reminding us? We were very helpful. Instead, we have to start saying something, and it's because words are power, but they have to be genuine. We have to start saying, I need your help. I need your help. I was giving a talk one evening, and a guy comes up to me, he says, I coach Little League. I said, great, I love sports. He said, but I got a team, they're very irresponsible. These are 9-year-old kids. I said, like how? You know, they don't pick up the balls after, they don't pick up this. I said, so, in a nice way, so what do you say to them? And he said, well, I tell them, pick up the balls. I said, tomorrow I want you to do something else, because he told me it was a practice. Say to them, we're a team, and I really need your help. And see what happens. I couldn't believe it. He calls me right after the practice, just like he says, how come this stuff works? Everyone wants to feel they make a difference. And we have to do it as families. That's how, you see, we lecture too much about compassion and responsibility. Kids have to taste it. They have to experience it, and they have to see it in us. So a major part of resilience, and some of the most at-risk kids I've worked with, I've done this, is involve kids in helping others. By the way, I shouldn't say by the way again, incidentally, sometimes programs around bullying, I think we have to focus on having kids helping other kids. Because I've worked with some very aggressive kids, but when they are helping other kids, like one 4th grader who went down to help 1st graders, I love this, pack their backpacks and things, he became much less of a bully. He actually became very cooperative. Another thing, let me just quickly look, because I want to leave time for questions. Another major thing is, this goes back at least 45 years because I was not a father yet. I read the following. Have any of you ever read this? We must learn to accept our children for who they are, not what we want them to be. Before I became a father, you know what I said? What's the big deal? They're your kids. Of course you accept them for who they are. Then Richard was born. I said, oh. And 3.5 years later, Douglas comes along. And I said, oh, this is really something. And then parents started to say to me, some kids are easier to accept than others. Yeah, because you know why? Even before we become parents, whether you realize it or not, we already have dreams of who our children are going to be. And you all know this, any parent in the room. Some kids do not live up to your dreams. And kids are different. So when we say accept kids for who they are, this gets to another point. I'm often asked, are some kids born more resilient? Are kids born differently? Yes. But fortunately, there's research. I'll just give you one example. In the 1950s, I believe it was, 2 psychiatrists, a husband and wife team, were, as far as I was concerned, to revolutionize the field of child development. Their names are Chess and Thomas. They decided to study hundreds of infants in New York City. Hundreds. One of the main questions, are kids different at birth? So they study hundreds of infants. They write this wonderful book, Know Your Child. Now, I'll tell you why I think they called it that. They become famous in the field of child development. And they came to an amazing conclusion. You all holding on to your chairs? Every child is different at birth. And at one time, a woman yelled, I could have told them that. I said, yeah, but they actually developed a scale to measure how infants were different at birth. You know what they found? Some infants are born happy, some are born sad. Some infants are born, you could take them out into 2 tornadoes and 3 hurricanes, and if they could speak, you know what they would say? My God, this is exciting. Other kids, you change their routine 1 iota, they start to cry. And this is before parents have had a chance to screw things up. So they take these temperamental characteristics, and they said within reason, and please understand there's a lot of overlap, within reason they labeled 3 kinds of kids who come into this world. I'm going to describe them. By the way, if any of you have 3 kids, you may have 1 of each. But why did they call the book Know Your Child? As far as I could tell, they felt this. Even loving, well-meaning parents, if you don't know about the inborn temperament of your child, you may say or do things not out of malevolence but out of ignorance where you actually hurt their resilience. Let me describe the 3 kids. By the way, I love their descriptions. One child they called the easy child. You know what they're like? The moment they come out, they look up to you as if to say, don't you worry, I'm going to make you feel like the best parent to ever walk the earth. Easy children are the ones you cannot wait to bring to your own parents, as if to say, see, this is how you raise children. Easy children are the ones you cannot wait to have a school conference about, and the teacher cannot wait to have one with you. Some of you look puzzled, so let me tell you what happened. The teacher starts by saying, wonderful child, wonderful, wonderful, and you say, joy, 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 joy. It's almost nauseating, but anyway, easy kids are easier to raise. You know what? It's almost like they say to you, I'm going to make you feel like a charismatic adult. Do anything that way. Not every kid is easy. Then there was another kid they described, who I think we do a number on, not out of malevolence, out of ignorance. They said there's a whole group of kids, and Jerome Kagan at Harvard has studied this group a lot. There's a whole group of kids they call slow to warm up or cautious. Some people say shy, although I'm not sure they use that term. You know, they're always in the background. They never take the initiative. They're the kids, when you go visit someone, they're always behind you, and you say hello to them. You know, on that. But that's who they are. That is who they are. That's not the problem. It's what we do with it. So I'm seeing a 7-year-old girl in therapy, one of these slow to warm up shy kids. The moment she came home from school every day, would anyone like to guess the very first question her loving, kind mother asked her, out of anxiety? Anyone want to guess? Did you talk to anyone in school? Thank you, because I can't wait too long. Did you talk to anyone in school? You know, if you don't make an effort to talk to anyone, you're not going to have any friends. 7 years old, the girl looks at her mother and her father, we're having a little family meeting, and says this, don't you know if I could talk with someone I would? It's not that, look, I've never met a shy child nor a shy adult who said, I love being shy, I hope it gets worse so I can qualify for a psychiatric disorder like social phobia. I mean, most people want to be able to, go in a room, whatever. But then someone said to me, wait a second. You're saying know your child, so if you know your child is more reserved and whatever, you should not help them? Yes, but one boy once said to me, I wish for once my parents would be my defense attorneys rather than my prosecuting attorneys. which I thought was, and by the way, his parents weren't even lawyers, so I even thought this was interesting. So I'm just going to give you a glimpse, because for me, empathy is very important. How do you put yourself in the kids' shoes so they do not see you as their prosecuting attorneys? So let me give you a glimpse of the kinds of questions I suggest that parents and the comments parents and teachers make. So you'll get a sense of what helps to build kids up, know your child. So this is an actual example of a shy kid. Talk to the parents about saying to the kid, and listen even to the words, I know it's not easy for you to say hello to kids you don't know. It's not easy for some other kids also. You know what you're doing there? You're empathizing and you're normalizing. Now, you'll never lie to a kid, but what I'm saying is actually based on research. The third part of the message I want you to underline wherever you do, because it's the problem-solving part. But please remember this. One of the main aspects of resilience is resilient people see problems as things to be solved rather than overwhelmed by. So they believe they have the capacity to solve problems. So the third part of the message is, and even the words I'll use, especially if it's young kids with the parents, say to your child, maybe together we can figure out what will help to make it a little easier to say hello. Now you're engaging the child into a problem solving. Because, you see, think of it this way. I'll raise my hand first. Have any of you in this room ever faced a problem where your first thought was, I don't even know where to start? Imagine if almost every problem you faced, you felt that way. That's when kids have meltdowns. That's when by the way, that's when adults have meltdowns as well on that. So maybe together we could figure out what will help. And if it fits in nicely, the fourth part is the message of hope. And the message of hope in a case like that would be, you know, a lot of kids who have trouble saying hello when they're younger, it could start getting a little easier as they get older. By the way, everything I just said is based on research. Again, you want to be genuine with the kid. So I'm seeing this little boy. I talked to his parents about this approach. This is when I wish I could have had a hidden camera, but it's not ethical. So I show you rather than, so the parents basically say in the session, they say, maybe together we could figure out what will help to make it a little easier. So the kid shouts out, I don't like to say hello to people. So they say, I thought this was great. Is there any other way? So cute. He says, I think what I could do is maybe I could wave hello when I meet them. The parent, the father especially, goes over, hugs the kid. He says, that's a wonderful idea. And then the kid says, I have a question. You never know what to expect. So I said, well, what's the question? Should I wave this way or this way? And the parent said, anyway. But now you see, now he feels that he's not a victim. He feels he has a way of solving the problem. Know your child. But by the way, I've mentioned two kids. Easy, slow to warm up. Does anyone know what they call the third child? What? Difficult, good. Because one time I said to a group like yourself, do you know what they call the third child? This mother yells, I do! So I said, oh, she must have read their book. And I said, what do they call the third child? Just like, mother killer. I said, oh my God. I was not expecting that, let me tell you. They actually did call the child difficult. Some people think that's too negative. A dear friend of mine, some of you know her work, she's a parent educator in Minneapolis, Mary Sheedy Kazinka, wrote a wonderful book, Raising Your Spirited Child. You know, by the way, just for this room, I don't care what you call the kid. They're a little more difficult. Remember I said easy kids come out, they look up to you as if to say, I'm going to make you feel like the best parent who ever walked the earth. You know, difficult kids, in my mind? 2 guns pointed right at you. You're in for this. Let me tell you. They, well, I don't know what to say, but let me just say this, because I don't want to scare people. Okay, but if you have a difficult child, I don't even have to describe the kid to you. You probably came here today to get away. Now, if you have a difficult child, you've learned you do not argue with them. No. You'll never win. Difficult children also have hypersensitivities. Any of you have kids who say, I can't stand the label on my shirt? Oh, yeah. Yeah. And by the way, by the time they're 3 years old, do I have to wear underwear? Do I have to wear socks? Do I have to wear anything? I think we should start a nudist preschool, but there are a lot of complications. They're hypersensitive to sound. Mm-hmm. These are the first kids who'll say, you're yelling at me. And I love it as parents, we try to remain calm. No, I'm not. They won't give up. Yes, you are. No, I'm not. And eventually we all lose it, don't we? You think this is yelling? By the way, if you have a kid who accuses you of yelling, use what we call a paradoxical intervention. Just say this: "Thank you so much for letting me know that I am yelling at you, because I could see how much you really want to listen to me. And if I yell, you're not going to be able to listen. By the way, it may not work, but you'll feel much better." But you know, as much as we laugh, let me tell you what happens, why some kids are not going to be as resilient. If you don't know your child, I'm seeing a 5-year-old boy, one of the most temperamentally difficult kids you'll ever want to see. His parents, not surprisingly, look exhausted. He doesn't sleep well, he doesn't eat well, everything is an argument. And I said to this wonderful mother and father, "Tell me about your son." And I heard a comment which I will never forget. The mother said, "My son made me feel like the most inadequate mother in the world from the moment I first held him." And I remember saying, "Wow, why?" And she said, "You know what it feels like to hold your newborn and they seem to squirm out of your arms, because many difficult kids are hypersensitive to touch, don't want to be held. You know what it feels like?" She said, "I would give him a bath and dry him off and he'd start to cry." By the way, I loved giving my sons a bath. You know what? They smell so good afterwards. You wrap them in a towel. And now they have these, my grandkids have these fancy towels with heads coming out of them and, you know, whatever. So, but listen to what this mother said. "I would give him a bath and dry him off and he'd start to cry." Because she thought it was a soft towel. He probably experienced it like sandpaper. He was hypersensitive to touch. But you see, the sad thing was, she didn't know anything about temperament. So within a month, she felt she was a bad mother and already emotionally was becoming estranged from her kid. Know your child. Charismatic adults know that we have to learn to accept kids. Accept doesn't mean you let them get away with anything. What accept means is you better know their temperament. And you're going to have to accommodate to them much more than they can accommodate to you in those years. Someone said to me, "What happens to difficult kids?" Not joking, really. I said, if you don't kill them along the way, many turn out to be very wonderful adults if you know your child. So that is one of the most basic things the research has found. Let me just check. Okay. Well, I had to take Xanax because I was told I had 45 minutes. Cut that out. Okay. The next thing has to do with mistakes. Well, you try to condense 40 years into 45 minutes. Okay. I don't even have to tell you this research, but you all know it. There are a group of kids out there that if they make a mistake, they strike out in a Little League game, they fail a test, they fall down doing a dance. It's not that they jump up with glee and say, "Don't worry, this is a teachable moment for me." By the way, if they did, I'd be stunned. But you know what? You know what their mindset is? They basically believe that mistakes are experiences from which to learn, and there are adults, charismatic adults behind them, who will not judge or accuse them, but instead help them. Then there's a group of kids, and if any of you has a child like this, you know how painful it is. There's a group of kids who feel like every mistake is like a rock around their neck, which weighs them down more and more and more, and soon they are sinking in quicksand. They feel like every mistake they cannot learn from. Think how painful this is. Let's be empathic, put ourselves in their shoes. If you keep making mistakes, but you feel you cannot learn from them, eventually, I've been writing about humiliation. No one wants to be humiliated. And eventually, they will do things like that kid I told you about. I'd rather hit another kid and be sent to the principal's office than have to be in a classroom. They will quit at things. They won't try at things. It's so frustrating to us. So one of the main things of a charismatic adult in a child's life to really foster a certain comfort with falling on your face and making a mistake is we have to then think about how do we help kids feel that mistakes are expected and accepted. So here again, these are the questions in my clinical practice I ask parents. And I always say to parents, how do you think your kids would answer this? First question, when you make a mistake, if I asked your children this, if I said to your children, when your parents make a mistake, what do they do? Do you know what I found? Children are exquisite observers of how we deal with mistakes and frustration. Now, you know what I wish every kid would say? I wish they would say, "Dr. Brooks, they follow what you suggest. They are great problem solvers. Every time they make a mistake, they say, what is it we could do differently next time? Let's just keep calm. Let's think of different solutions." By the way, does that sound good? Would you like to hear the actual things I've heard in my practice? They scream, they yell. One little girl was so cute. I said, when your parents make a mistake, like if something doesn't go right, what do? They say words they tell me not to say. Oh, but you want to hear my all-time favorite? I asked the boy, when your parents make a mistake, what do? He looks up at me just like this, says, "What's a double martini?" Now this is not... As Art Linkletter used to say, kids say the darndest things and that. So notice what kind of model you are. The other question I love to ask kids is this. When you make a mistake, and I ask parents to really predict what the kid, when you make a mistake, what do your parents say or do? You know what I wish every kid would say? Dr. Brooks, they come over and they say, what do we learn from this? What can we do differently next time? They really help me. See, problem solving. You want to hear actual things? Similar. They scream, they yell. One boy, I had barely finished the question, and he started to tear up. I said, what is it? He says, when I make a mistake, my parents say things that hurt me. And I remember saying, really? And he looked at me and said, God, I love these young philosophers. Should parents ever say things that hurt their kids? And I said, no, but you know, sometimes parents don't even realize, so what do they say? And he said, well, like the other day, my mother said, you really have to start using your brains. So there was a woman in my audience one time said, oh, is it really that bad? Because sometimes I'll say to my kids, come on, use your brains. Is it that bad? And I said, you know, if you say it once, okay. But imagine if you're saying it a lot. How would you feel, I said, if you went out with some friends and you made a mistake and they turned to you and said, another mistake? Were you using your brains? I said, be honest, would you say to them, that was very helpful, I just feel very supported here. But we say it to kids. You know, it's so interesting. We say we want kids to be resilient, and sometimes the way we respond to that falling on their face works so much against that. Sometimes the way we behave works against it. They notice us. And it's really, we're their models. The very last thing, I think I will get there by it has to do with discipline. I spent a year writing a book on how do you discipline children in ways they will become more responsible, respectful, and resilient rather than more angry and resentful. Because I want to say this, one of the main roles of a charismatic adult is to be a disciplinarian. But the word discipline stems from the word disciple. It is a teaching process. And no child should ever, ever be humiliated or intimidated under the guise of discipline. If you go to my website, I'm just going to mention this quickly now. When I did that, and some of you may know this research, researchers have actually identified 3 kinds of parenting style related to discipline, only one of which has to do with, I think, leading to being a charismatic adult. One is the authoritarian, where parents yell and scream, they spank, very little problem solving. By the way, I'm not into negotiation with kids. I think there's too much negotiation, but there's no, I mean, they come down very hard on the kid. The other extreme is the laissez-faire, or what they call permissive, where almost no limits are set. And you know what? They found there a whole group of parents who finally set a limit, and you know, the kids are bright. The kid says, you don't love me. And the parents say, yes, I do. Well, if you love me, you wouldn't take TV away for the week. And you know what they found? There's a whole group of parents who were really afraid to lose their kids' love. And so they gave in. You know what happened though? It backfired. Because not only did many of these kids grow up very entitled, but many of them, as one girl taught me once, when I lived in Denver, was working at the University of Colorado Medical Center, at the age of 13, she became pregnant, had an abortion. I see her at 14, she had no curfew when at 13. And I said, well, if your parents had set a curfew, what would you have done? She said, I would have fought them tooth and nail. But then she just broke down crying and said, at least I would have known they cared about me. Sometimes, not to set any limits at all, it's not very helpful. Sometimes, no child wants to grow up feeling more powerful than his or her parents. No one will thank you for discipline. But we've got to feel comfortable even if our kids are annoyed with us sometimes. But the third parent, so we had the authoritarian, the laissez-faire, is the one we should strive towards. That was the authoritative. The authoritative parent, it sounds like authoritarian, very different. They recognize something. That one of the main roles of a parent is to be a disciplinarian. They realize that there have to be consistent rules. They realize something else that was very important. One of the main roles of discipline, if you want children to be resilient, is that the child develops self-discipline so that even if you're not there, they start incorporating your rules. And you know what they would observe? You could, starting at a young age, you know how those parents would handle things? Everything they said and did basically was for the child to learn that rules are not arbitrary, but that your behaviors lead to certain consequences. So let me give you a very simple example. Kid is playing with toys in the family room, and the parent says, when you finish playing, please put the toys away. Kid doesn't. Next day, the same thing. And then you know what the parent says? It's your choice. If you don't put the toys away today, they won't be here for you to play with tomorrow. Nothing extraordinary. See, it's your choice. And what the kid learns is my behavior leads to certain consequences. By the way, these kids grow up much more emotionally healthy than anyone else. You know where some of the foremost research is taking place on discipline? Well, maybe more than a little north of here, at the University of New Hampshire. Really looking at this, longitudinal studies that were done. And okay, in 3 minutes, 4 minutes, I'm going to tell you what kids really need, because I'm going to tell you one last story and then I will take your questions. When I talk about discipline, what often happens is so many of the questions I get have to do with punishment. Bob, what should I do if my kid hits, my son hits my daughter, or this? But years ago, a friend of mine was working in Boys Town, now it's called Boys and Girls Town in Nebraska, a wonderful residential treatment program. Years ago it was an orphanage. And he sent me an article written by a psychologist at Boys Town that said, part of the problem is too often we do not acknowledge when kids are doing something correct. And he talked about a praise deficit. I don't even use the word praise that much. I like encouragement better. But when I read that, I thought about the home where I grew up in. And I'm the youngest of 4 sons. Just to quickly tell you a little about myself. Both my parents were immigrants from Europe. They had probably the equivalent of a 6th or 7th grade education. But it shows you formal education has very little to do with parenting skills. I felt really just unconditional love in that house. I didn't have the words to describe it. All I know is I felt very good. I felt my parents really acknowledged my strengths. Like one of my islands of competence growing up is, I used to love to draw cartoons. I did my own comic books. And every time I did a cartoon or something, I would show it to my parents. And I'm going to tell you the file story. My parents kept a file on me and my 3 brothers. Everything went in the files. Birthday cards, report cards, my drawings. I would show my parents a drawing. They were wise enough not to say a future Picasso, but they would say things like, we should save this. You'll like to look at this. And it went in the file. I had no idea if the other 3 million people in Brooklyn, New York had files. We did. My mom died. My mom died 35 years ago, very suddenly and at a relatively young age. After she died, my brothers, our wives, and my father were sitting around, and we were crying, having lost someone so special and so suddenly. And then my father, who's 76 at the time, a very simple but very emotionally strong man, he had been through quite a bit, he looked at me and my brothers and he said, boys, those files were very important to your mom, but what you may not realize, they're just as important to me. So if it's okay, in her memory, can I keep your files going? We all started to cry. With middle-aged sons, he wants to keep the files going in unison. We all said, keep the files going. My father kept those files going for the next 10 years. My father, ironically or coincidentally, I don't know the best word, died 1 day apart from the 10th anniversary of my mother's death. Now I'm going to give you a gift. I'm going to give you a gift that was given to me, and I hope you can use it in your families. I want to give you the very last words my father ever said to me before he died. He was 86 years old. He had moved from New York to Florida. My wife and I were vacationing in Florida. And when it came time for us to go back to Boston, as he always did, my father was a hugger. By the way, where I grew up in Brooklyn, everyone hugged. I remember Mr. and Mrs. Gallo next door. I hugged them. I knew them. They had visitors. I hugged them. I thought that's what people did. Now I found out you could get arrested in some neighborhoods for this kind of behavior. And a friend once said to me, you'll see why I use the word gift, and I'm telling you this quickly. A friend once said to me, your father has a gift. Now, I love my father, but a gift? And he said, you see, you grew up with it, so you don't know it's a gift. And I was intrigued. He said, your father could know someone for 5 or 10 minutes, and when he said goodbye to them, they would remember that goodbye for the rest of their lives. And my wife, who adored my father, I think she married me so he could be her father-in-law. You know how she described it? She said, your father has words of honey. He just knows what to say. So we're vacation in Florida. My father hugs and kisses me, and he said something to me when we were getting ready to go back to Boston that I got to tell you, on the flight back, I said, I am blessed he is my father. But you never know what happens. Just 2 days later, my brother, who lives in Florida, called. He was really crying. He said, Bobby, get down here quickly. Dad took ill very suddenly. And you know, the denial, you know my first comment? He can't be that sick. I just saw him 2 days ago. My brother said, get down here. I take the next flight. And by the time I get there, my brother greets me. He says, Dad is in a hospice. They don't expect him to live through the night. And so we raced to the hospice, and some of you have experienced this. Me and my brothers each went in alone, held my father in our arms separately, and we said goodbye. And although they said he was comatose, maybe I just want to believe this, I think he heard every word, because it was interesting to me. I knew he was going to die soon. But after we all said our goodbyes, like 5 minutes later, he peacefully died. It was like his son said goodbye, and then he could go. But what were the last words he said to me at that airport? And this is the point I want you all to take. My father never knew those were going to be his last words. See, my father had a philosophy. He never preached it, he modeled it. My father felt during our lives we have thousands and thousands of opportunities to build other people up. Our husbands, our wives, our children, our friends. And my father could never understand, if you have so many opportunities, he didn't have the word charismatic adult, to be a charismatic adult, why is it we can be so critical and nitpicking about the stupidest things? And my father genuinely believed if there's ever an opportunity to build someone up, don't let it go by. So these were the very last words he ever said. He never knew they were going to be this. He hugs and kisses me in this airport, and he says, now, Bobby, remember, when you get back to Boston, if you have anything you could send me for the file, please do. I always enjoy receiving things from you and hearing from you. I love you so dearly. You're so special to me. I never heard another word. What a gift. I'm going to challenge all of you. Those are the memories you have, you want your children to have of you, husbands and wives. Take those special moments, because those are the moments which really help someone to feel very special and appreciated. And it's that unconditional love. It's the relationship upon which resilience is so based. And I'll take your questions now, but I'll tell you one more comment. Someone once said to me, when I took questions, said, Bob, I love your ideas. And they're very thought-provoking. I said, thank you. And just like they said, but they're not easy to do. And you know what I said? I said, if you think what I've suggested is not easy, I'll tell you it's not easy. Don't do any of these things. Then you'll see what's not easy. So I hope there's a lot of food for thought in summarizing the passion of over the last 40 years. There are things we could do. And now I would love in the last 10, 15 minutes to take some questions from the audience.